Alright, setting up my machine by putting my bobbin in. I make the P for perfect, and then make sure to get that thread caught in the thread guide. There we go. I'm going to thread the top of my machine now. It looks different than yours. That is okay. You've got videos and also your good friend Google and Google's buddy YouTube to help you out with that too. Make sure that you get your take-up lever threaded. You want that thread to be caught. It kind of looks like a little shepherd's crook. You want it to be caught in your take-up lever. Otherwise, you're sewing, well, let's just say you won't get very far. It'll probably do like a couple of stitches and then go and if you've got a digital machine, it'll go beep. So, when in doubt, always check the take-up lever. And you're just going to rethread is all. Okie dokie. Now I'm getting the bobbin loop. Alright, so I just hold the needle thread in front of me, roll the hand wheel towards me to make the needle go down and come back up. It catches the bobbin thread. I untangle the little loop that it makes. Here. Put the threads underneath the presser foot and behind the machine. Alright. First set of stitches is basting, so I changed my stitch length to 5. Gonna make long stitches. You put your presser foot down and your needle in. And then before you take your fabric out, you make sure the take-up lever is all the way at the top. Then you raise your presser foot and pull your fabric out. This seems like I'm being a little crazy, a little controlling, and maybe that is the case, but this method of making sure that the take-up lever is all the way at the top before you take your fabric out is a complete game changer. I wish I knew it when I first started sewing. And the next row of stitches is standard stitching, so what you will normally use anywhere from 2.5 to 3. If you have a digital machine, most likely the stitch length settings are automatic for your standard stitching. Alright, notice I take it out. I'm going to trim my threads. If you trim your threads as you go, you're much less likely to get a big old tangle, big knot. It's also, I don't know, it just looks nicer. It makes me feel more accomplished when I've got something that looks nice on the fabric. This next row, I set the stitch length to 1. Reinforcement stitches are somewhere around there, 1.1, 1.5. And they're going to make really tiny stitches. And if you have really tiny stitches, you can make a lot of stitches in one small section, which will help reinforce any seam that you're trying to make, hence the name reinforcement stitching. The basting stitches were really long because you want them to be long and sort of loose so that you can easily take them out later, because that's what basting is. It's sewing something together temporarily. Alright, this next one, you're practicing not looking at the needle. Line up the edge of your fabric with the 5/8 line engraved on your machine. Then you're going to sew, keeping your eyeballs focused on the 5/8 line and the edge of your fabric, making sure that they stay together. This next one is sewing 3/8 of an inch from the previous line. So you use the previous line as your guide. Line it up with 3/8 engraved on the machine, and then you do your absolute best to keep it steady. I know you can't see the line anymore engraved on the machine, but you can see the distance between the edge of your presser foot and the previous row of stitching, and you just try to keep it the same. The next one is a 1/2 inch from the previous line. And you do the same thing. Line it up with a 1/2 inch engraving mark. And get started and use your eyeballs to keep track of the width between the edge of the presser foot and the previous row of stitching. That way it stays the same throughout. And our last row is a 1/4 inch from the previous row of stitching. On my presser foot, a 1/4 inch is just before the edge of the presser foot. So that's how I know. So on that one. But you can also line it up ahead of time, like we've been doing. Alright, square number 3, we're playing around with the zigzag stitches and the decorative stitches. Alright, so you're going to need to play with your stitch width control, which that's what mine looks like. Yours probably looks like buttons with a minus and a plus sign. Alright, so I changed it to the zigzag stitch pattern and changed the stitch width to be pretty narrow. I mean, it's more than 0, but it's not very wide. Now I'm going to keep the stitch length the same, but I am going to change the stitch width so you can really see the difference between a narrow zigzag and a wide zigzag. So that's as wide as my machine will let it go. And reset. Zigzag stitches are going to be helpful when you sew thick fabric, stretchy fabric. Zigzag stitches are helpful. Finishing the edges of seams. Zigzags are good to use. Now, I'm going to be honest, I tried the decorative stitches on my machine. I don't have very many, and I also don't have the manual telling me what settings to adjust. So it looks a little crazy. The good news is if you have a computerized machine, you can just choose the stitch pattern on the computer sets the machine as to what the length and the width should be on its own. You don't have to do any of the figuring out. That is helpful.
Alright, and the last one.
Okay, the last square we have here is square number 4, and I want you to draw a design. You don't have to have chalk. You can draw this with a pencil. You might need to use a marker or a crayon. Actually, I don't suggest a crayon. A marker or a pencil should be fine. You can always draw on the wrong side of the fabric, the back side, if it's easier to see. Make sure you have your machine back on straight stitching and normal stitch length. And you may not always start sewing when you're trying to stitch out a design. You may not always start sewing where you would normally start drawing or writing. So you have to think about how the fabric is going to move through the machine and how does that change your direction. Now, curves are hard. You got to learn when to move the fabric. When the needle is up, that's when you can move the fabric. If you try to move the fabric to curve it while the needle is down, it's going to fight you. So it's really just about becoming one with your machine. If you get to a really tough spot and a really sharp turn, you can use this pivot method where you leave the needle in, lift the presser foot up, spin your fabric to a new place, put the presser foot back down, and keep on sewing. You want to make sure your needle's down for this because otherwise you'll lose track. There we go. That is your first sewing assignment from me. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you are safely playing around with your other scraps of fabric. Happy sewing.
Okay, that's it.